My name is Rebecca Lawson. I'm 46 years old, and I live in San Diego, California. Yesterday, my ex-husband, Brian Lawson, slapped me so hard that I fell to the ground. His new wife, Tiffany, filmed everything while laughing. I stood up, trembling, and whispered, "You're going to regret this." The next day, I put chili in his condoms, and he called me from the hospital in a panic. And when I revealed what I had done, his voice trembled even more. But let me take you back to the beginning, to show you how a woman who once believed in love and family found herself plotting the most unexpected revenge against the man who destroyed her life. I was once Rebecca Martinez, a hopeful young woman from a modest family in East San Diego. At 22, I met Brian Lawson at a community college where I was studying business administration while working 2 jobs to pay for my education. Brian was charming, ambitious, and promised me a future filled with love and prosperity. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony that cost me my entire savings of $3,200, money I had been saving for years to finish my degree. For 20 years, I dedicated my life to building our family. I gave up my career dreams to raise our 2 children, Emma and Michael, while Brian climbed the corporate ladder at his accounting firm. I managed our household with precision, stretching every dollar of his $45,000 annual salary in those early years. I clipped coupons, cooked every meal from scratch, and turned our modest 3-bedroom house into a warm home. When Brian's income grew to $85,000 annually, I thought our struggles were over. I suggested returning to school to finish my degree, but Brian convinced me that the family needed me at home. "You're so good at managing everything here, Rebecca," he would say. "Why complicate things?" So I stayed, nurturing our family while he built his career. Our 20th wedding anniversary was supposed to be a celebration of everything we had built together. I had planned a surprise party, inviting 30 of our closest friends and family members to our backyard. I spent $1,800 of our savings decorating the space with fairy lights and Brian's favorite flowers. I wore the emerald green dress he had complimented years earlier, hoping to recapture some of the magic from our early years. That evening, as our guests mingled and laughed, Brian pulled me aside with an expression I had never seen before. His eyes were cold, distant, as if he were looking at a stranger. "Rebecca, we need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart began to race, sensing that something was terribly wrong. "Not here, Brian. Not tonight. Our guests? I've been seeing someone else," he interrupted, his words hitting me like a physical blow. "Her name is Tiffany. She's 28, and I'm in love with her." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of sacrifice, reduced to those brutal words spoken while our anniversary guests celebrated in the background. I felt my knees weaken, but I forced myself to remain standing. "How long?" I managed to whisper. 8 months, he replied without a trace of remorse. "I want a divorce, Rebecca. I've already spoken to a lawyer." That night, as I cleaned up the remnants of our anniversary celebration alone, I realized that Brian had been planning this moment for months. While I was arranging flowers and sending invitations, he was arranging to destroy our family. The divorce proceedings that followed were brutal and calculated. Brian, with his knowledge of finances and his connections, managed to hide assets and minimize his obligations. Despite contributing $67,000 of my inheritance from my grandmother to our home's down payment, I walked away with only $23,000 after legal fees. Brian kept the house, most of our savings, and his pension. If you're watching this story unfold and can relate to feeling betrayed by someone you trusted, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with people who understand that sometimes life tests us in ways we never expected. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, Brian married Tiffany in a lavish ceremony that cost more than our entire wedding 24 years earlier. I heard from mutual friends that he spent $35,000 on a destination wedding in Hawaii, money that could have helped our children with their college expenses. Instead, Emma had to take out student loans of $18,000 for her first year, while Michael worked double shifts at a restaurant to afford his textbooks. Tiffany was everything I wasn't in Brian's eyes. Young, blonde, with a social media presence that showcased her expensive tastes and carefree lifestyle. She had never sacrificed anything for anyone, never stayed up all night with sick children, never counted pennies to make ends meet. She was Brian's trophy, proof that he could start over and erase the 20 years we had built together. The worst part wasn't Brian's betrayal. It was how Tiffany seemed to take pleasure in my pain. She would post photos on social media from restaurants where Brian and I used to celebrate our anniversaries. She wore jewelry that looked suspiciously similar to pieces I had admired but could never afford. It was as if she was deliberately trying to replace every memory I had with Brian. 3 months after their wedding, Emma graduated from college. Despite everything that had happened between Brian and me, I wanted our children to have both parents at this important milestone. I had worked extra hours at my new job as a receptionist at a dental office, earning $28,000 annually to afford a beautiful dress for the ceremony and a gift for Emma. At the graduation, I maintained my dignity. I smiled, congratulated Emma, and tried to focus on my daughter's achievement rather than the painful presence of Brian and Tiffany. They sat 3 rows behind me, and I could hear Tiffany's loud whispers about my outdated dress and how sad I looked. After the ceremony, we gathered at a restaurant for a family dinner. I had offered to pay for everyone's meal, a gesture that would cost me nearly $200, a significant portion of my weekly earnings. As we waited for our table, Brian approached me with Tiffany at his side. "Rebecca, you look different," he said, his tone condescending. "Have you been taking care of yourself?" Before I could respond, Tiffany laughed. "Oh, honey, she's probably just tired from working so hard. Not everyone can afford the spa treatments and personal trainers like some people." Her words were delivered with a sugar-sweet smile that made them even more cutting. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. "I'm doing just fine, thank you," I replied calmly. But Tiffany wasn't finished. "You know, Rebecca, you should really update your wardrobe. Brian and I were just saying how much better you'd look if you made more of an effort. Maybe something more age-appropriate?" The cruelty in her voice was unmistakable. She was deliberately trying to humiliate me in front of our children and other family members. Brian said nothing to defend me. Instead, he smiled, as if he was enjoying the show. That night, I went home to my small apartment and cried for the first time since the divorce. Not because of the marriage I had lost, but because of the deliberate cruelty I was being subjected to. I had tried to maintain dignity and grace throughout the divorce process, but it seemed that Brian and Tiffany were determined to strip away even that. I realized that my attempts to take the high road were being interpreted as weakness. They thought they could continue to humiliate me without consequences. They thought I would simply accept their treatment and fade quietly into the background of their new life. They were wrong. For months after Emma's graduation, I tried to rebuild my life quietly. I focused on my work, took evening classes to update my business skills, and attempted to create a new routine that didn't revolve around the family I had lost. I even started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, who helped me process the anger and grief that threatened to consume me. "You have every right to feel angry, Rebecca," Dr. Chen would tell me during our weekly sessions. "But don't let that anger define your future. Channel it into something positive." I tried to follow her advice. I really did. But Brian and Tiffany seemed determined to make that impossible. The harassment continued in small, calculated ways. Tiffany would accidentally bump into me at the grocery store where she knew I shopped, always with some cutting comment about my appearance or financial situation. Brian would change plans with our children at the last minute, always with Tiffany's voice audible in the background, making it clear that she was influencing his decisions. The final straw came on Michael's 20th birthday. I had planned a small celebration at my apartment, nothing elaborate, just homemade cake and a few gifts I had saved up to buy. Michael had specifically asked his father to come, hoping that for one evening we could put aside our differences for his sake. Brian arrived an hour late with Tiffany, who immediately began criticizing everything about my modest celebration. "Oh, Michael, honey, we should have just taken you to that new steakhouse instead," she said loudly. "This is so quaint." I bit my tongue and continued serving cake, determined not to let her ruin Michael's birthday. But when she pulled out her phone and started filming the gathering while making snide comments about my sad little party, I asked her politely to stop. "Excuse me?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "This is a family gathering, isn't it? I'm family now." "Please, just put the phone away," I said quietly. "This is Michael's day." Brian, who had been silent throughout Tiffany's performance, suddenly stood up. "Don't tell my wife what to do, Rebecca. You don't get to make rules anymore." The venom in his voice shocked everyone in the room, including our children. Emma and Michael exchanged worried glances as the tension in the room became unbearable. "I'm not making rules," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm asking for basic respect in my own home." "Respect?" Tiffany laughed harshly. "You want to talk about respect? You need to learn your place, Rebecca. You're the ex-wife. You're yesterday's news. Brian has moved on to better things." Something inside me snapped. 20 years of marriage, months of divorce proceedings, and endless humiliation all crystallized into a moment of pure rage. "Get out," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Both of you, get out of my home right now." Brian stepped closer to me, his face twisted with anger. "You can't kick us out. We came here for Michael." "I said get out," I repeated, louder this time. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever. Brian raised his hand and slapped me so hard that I fell to the ground, my head hitting the corner of my coffee table. The room went silent, except for the sound of Tiffany's laughter and the clicking of her phone as she recorded my humiliation. As I lay on the floor, my cheek burning and my head throbbing, I heard Michael shouting at his father. Emma was crying, but all I could focus on was Tiffany's delighted laughter as she captured my lowest moment on video. I stood up slowly, trembling with rage and humiliation. Brian was already heading toward the door, clearly proud of what he had done. Tiffany was still filming, her eyes bright with malicious joy. That's when I looked directly into her camera and whispered, "You're going to regret this." That night, after Emma and Michael left, both of them horrified by what they had witnessed, I sat alone in my apartment with an ice pack on my swollen cheek and rage burning in my chest. The humiliation was unbearable, but what made it worse was knowing that Tiffany had recorded everything. She had probably already shared the video with her friends, turning my pain into entertainment. For the first time since my divorce, I wasn't thinking about dignity or taking the high road. I was thinking about revenge. I called in sick to work the next day, something I had never done unless I was genuinely ill. Instead, I spent the entire day researching Brian's routines, his habits, his weaknesses. I knew him better than anyone. 20 years of marriage had taught me things about him that Tiffany would never know. Brian was a creature of habit, almost obsessively so. He went to the gym every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. He bought his coffee from the same cafe every morning. He had his car serviced at the same garage every 3 months. And most importantly, he was still using the same brand of condoms he had used throughout our marriage, a detail I knew because I had found receipts in his wallet during the divorce proceedings. The idea came to me slowly, like a dark flower blooming in my mind. Brian was allergic to capsaicin, the compound that makes chili peppers hot. It wasn't a severe allergy, but it caused him significant discomfort and skin irritation. I had learned this the hard way early in our marriage when I had made him jalapeno poppers for a party. He had broken out in a rash that lasted for days. I spent hours researching the most potent chili peppers I could find locally. Ghost peppers, habaneros, Carolina Reapers, each one more intense than the last. I needed something that would cause maximum discomfort without causing permanent damage. This wasn't about seriously harming Brian. It was about making him suffer the way he had made me suffer. The logistics took careful planning. I knew Brian shopped at the same pharmacy every month to buy condoms, another detail from our marriage that served me well. The pharmacy was in a strip mall with limited security cameras, and the condom aisle was in a blind spot. I had noticed this months earlier when I had gone there to pick up my prescription medication. I also knew Brian's schedule well enough to predict when he would use the condoms. He and Tiffany had a standing date night every Friday, and given Tiffany's social media posts about their romantic evenings, I could make an educated guess about their intimate schedule. The most challenging part was obtaining the right type of chili extract. I couldn't simply buy it online because that would leave a digital trail. Instead, I drove to 3 different specialty stores across San Diego, paying cash for small amounts of various hot pepper extracts and dried chilies. I told each store clerk that I was experimenting with homemade hot sauce recipes, a believable story given the popularity of artisanal food preparation. Back at my apartment, I created what I privately called Rebecca's Revenge Sauce, a potent mixture of ghost pepper extract, habanero oil, and Carolina Reaper powder. I tested it on a piece of bread first, and even the smallest amount made my mouth burn for 20 minutes. I couldn't imagine what it would feel like on more sensitive skin, The hardest part was waiting for the right moment. I had to time everything perfectly. Too early, and Brian might notice something was wrong before the damage was done. Too late, and I might miss my opportunity altogether. Finally, on a Wednesday evening, I put my plan into action. I drove to the pharmacy wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, looking like any other customer running errands. I purchased a bottle of aspirin and some bandages to blend in, then made my way to the condom aisle. Brian's preferred brand was exactly where I expected it to be. With hands that were surprisingly steady, I carefully opened 3 boxes, applied my special mixture to the condoms using a small brush I had brought, and resealed the packages. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. As I drove home, I felt a mixture of anticipation and terror. I had crossed a line that I could never uncross, but as I touched my still tender cheek and remembered Tiffany's laughter as she filmed my humiliation, I felt no regret. Now all I had to do was wait. Friday night came and went, without any word from Brian. I spent the evening pacing my apartment, alternating between anxiety and anticipation. Had my plan failed? Maybe they hadn't used the condoms yet, or maybe Brian's tolerance for spice was higher than I remembered. Saturday morning brought silence as well. I began to wonder if I had made a mistake, if my revenge would fizzle out into nothing. But then, at 2:47 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, my phone rang. Brian's name appeared on the screen, and I let it ring 4 times before answering. When I did, his voice was nothing like the confident, condescending tone he had used at Michael's birthday party. "Rebecca," he gasped, and I could hear pain and panic in every syllable. "Rebecca, I'm at the hospital. Something's wrong. I think someone poisoned me." I let a moment of silence hang between us before responding in the most innocent voice I could muster. "Brian, what are you talking about? What happened?" "I'm in the emergency room at Scripps Mercy," he continued, his voice cracking. My entire genital area is on fire. The doctors say it looks like a chemical burn, but they can't figure out what caused it. Tiffany is here crying, and the nurses are asking all kinds of questions about what we might have been exposed to." I could picture the scene perfectly. Brian in a hospital gown, uncomfortable and embarrassed, while Tiffany panicked beside him. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was calling me, his ex-wife, for help while his new wife fell apart. "That sounds terrible, Brian," I said, injecting just the right amount of concern into my voice. "Have the doctors run any tests?" "They've done everything," he replied desperately. "Blood work, allergy tests. They even asked if I'd been exposed to any unusual chemicals or plants. Rebecca, I'm scared. What if this is permanent? What if I can't? What if Tiffany and I can't?" His voice trailed off, but I knew exactly what he was thinking. The possibility that his romantic life with his precious young wife might be compromised was clearly his greatest fear. Not his health, not the pain he was experiencing, but the threat to his relationship with Tiffany. "I'm sure the doctors will figure it out," I said calmly. "These things usually have simple explanations." "But that's just it," Brian continued, his voice becoming more frantic. "There is no explanation. We didn't eat anything unusual. We didn't go anywhere new. We didn't use any different products. The only thing we did differently was—" He paused, and I could practically hear his mind working. "Was what, Brian?" "The only thing different was that we were intimate last night. But we always use protection, and we've been using the same brand for months. There's no way." This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when Brian would realize that his pain wasn't random, wasn't an accident, wasn't just bad luck. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to reveal my hand. "Brian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that I knew would send chills down his spine. "Do you remember what you did to me at Michael's birthday party?" There was a long pause. I could hear muffled voices in the background, probably nurses checking on him. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Rebecca, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that actions have consequences," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I'm saying that when you humiliate someone in front of their children, when you assault them in their own home while your wife films it for entertainment, you shouldn't be surprised when that person decides to fight back." You didn't," he stammered. "Ghost pepper extract," I said simply, "mixed with habanero oil and Carolina Reaper powder. Applied to 3 boxes of your favorite condoms at Morrison's Pharmacy last Wednesday evening. I know your shopping habits, Brian. 20 years of marriage taught me more about you than you'll ever realize." The silence that followed was deafening. I could imagine Brian's face, the realization dawning that his ex-wife, quiet, submissive Rebecca, had orchestrated his current agony with surgical precision. When he finally spoke, his voice was trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. "You could have permanently damaged me, Rebecca. This is assault. This is criminal." "Is it?" I asked innocently. "Because I seem to remember you actually assaulting me in front of witnesses. Tiffany even filmed it, didn't she? I wonder what the police would think about that video." The power dynamic between us had shifted completely, and we both knew it. The phone call with Brian lasted another 20 minutes, during which his tone shifted from pain to panic to barely controlled rage. But beneath it all, I could hear something I had never heard from him before: fear. For the first time in our entire relationship, Brian was afraid of me. "You can't prove anything," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Even if you did what you're claiming, there's no evidence." "Isn't there?" I replied calmly. "I paid cash for everything, that's true. But I'm sure the pharmacy has security cameras showing when those boxes were purchased and when they were tampered with. I'm sure there are fingerprints. And I'm certainly sure that your medical records will show exactly what type of chemical caused your discomfort." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "But more importantly, Brian, I have witnesses to what you did to me. Emma and Michael saw you hit me. They saw Tiffany film it while laughing. If this becomes a legal matter, who do you think the police will sympathize with more? The abusive ex-husband who attacked his former wife in front of their children, or the victim who finally fought back?" The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Brian was calculating, trying to figure out how this would play out if it became public. His reputation, his career, his relationship with his children, all of it was suddenly at risk. "What do you want?" he asked finally, his voice defeated. "I want respect," I said firmly. "I want you and your wife to leave me alone. No more surprise visits, no more public humiliation, no more treating me like I'm invisible or worthless. I want to live my life in peace without your constant interference. And if I agree to that, then this stays between us. Your medical records will show an allergic reaction to an unknown substance. The doctors will recommend that you avoid spicy foods and perhaps be more careful about what products you use. You'll heal completely in a few days, and life will go on." Brian was quiet for so long that I began to wonder if he had hung up. Finally, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've changed, Rebecca. The woman I married would never have done something like this." "You're right," I agreed. "The woman you married believed in love, trust, and family. She believed that if she was good enough, loyal enough, selfless enough, she would be valued and protected. You taught me that woman was a fool." After Brian hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. The revenge had been everything I had hoped it would be: precise, poetic, and devastating. But now that it was over, I found myself wondering what came next. The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. This time it was Emma. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "Dad called me from the hospital. He said you hurt him. He said you put something in his—" I don't understand what's happening. My heart sank. I had been so focused on getting revenge against Brian that I hadn't fully considered how this would affect my children. Emma sounded confused and frightened, caught between her loyalty to me and her shock at what I had done. "Sweetheart," I said carefully, "your father and I had a disagreement. He's going to be fine." "But Mom, he said you poisoned him. He said you could have seriously hurt him. That doesn't sound like you at all." She was right, of course. It didn't sound like the mother she had known for 23 years. But that mother had been destroyed the night Brian slapped me while Tiffany filmed it for entertainment. "Emma, do you remember what happened at Michael's birthday party?" I asked gently. "Of course I remember. Dad hit you and that woman filmed it. It was horrible. How did that make you feel?" "Angry," she said immediately. "Furious. I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what. I've never seen Dad like that before. And I've never seen anyone treat another person so cruelly." "Well," I said quietly, "I did something." There was a long pause before Emma spoke again. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you really hurt Dad on purpose?" I took a deep breath, knowing that my answer would change my relationship with my daughter forever. "Yes," I said simply. "I did." Another pause, longer this time. When Emma spoke again, her voice was different. Stronger, more resolute. "Good," she said firmly. He deserved it. Emma's support gave me strength I didn't know I needed. Over the next few days, as Brian recovered from his allergic reaction, word began to spread through our extended family and friend network about what had happened at Michael's birthday party. Not the revenge part. I had been careful to keep that between Brian, myself, and now Emma, but the assault itself. My sister Maria was the first to call. "Rebecca, Emma told me what happened. Why didn't you call me immediately?" "I was embarrassed," I admitted. "I didn't want anyone to see me as a victim." "Victim?" Maria's voice was sharp with anger. "You're not a victim. You're a survivor. And what you did afterwards—" Emma didn't give me details, but she said you handled it. "I'm proud of you." The support was overwhelming and unexpected. Friends who had remained neutral during the divorce suddenly reached out, offering help and expressing their outrage at Brian's behavior. Even some of Brian's own family members called to apologize for what had happened. Michael's reaction was more complicated. When he finally called me 3 days after the hospital incident, his voice was heavy with confusion and disappointment. "Mom, I don't know what to think anymore," he said. "Dad hit you, which was completely wrong. But then what you did to him. I don't understand how you could plan something like that." "Your father has been humiliating me for months," I explained. "The divorce, the way he hid assets, the constant public embarrassment with Tiffany. I tried to take the high road, Michael, I really did. But when he hit me while she filmed it, something inside me broke. But you could have seriously hurt him, Mom. What if he had been allergic to something else in that mixture? What if it had caused permanent damage?" Michael's concerns were valid, and I couldn't dismiss them. "You're right," I said. "What I did was dangerous, and I'm not proud of that. But I'm also not sorry that your father learned there are consequences for his actions." It took several more conversations, but eventually, Michael came to understand my perspective, even if he didn't fully approve of my methods. The important thing was that both of my children knew they could count on me to protect myself, and, by extension, them. The most surprising support came from an unexpected source, Dr. Sarah Chen, my therapist. When I told her what had happened during our next session, she was quiet for a long moment. "Rebecca," she said finally, "I cannot and do not condone what you did. It was dangerous and potentially illegal. But I have to say, this is the first time since you started coming here that you've taken control of your own narrative." "What do you mean?" "For months, you've been reactive. Brian did something, Tiffany did something, and you absorbed it, processed it, tried to heal from it. But this time, you acted. You made a choice that was entirely your own, regardless of the consequences." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm not saying revenge is healthy, and I'm certainly not saying you should make a habit of it. But I am saying that the woman who planned and executed this revenge is not the same woman who came to my office 6 months ago believing she deserved to be treated badly." Dr. Chen was right. The revenge had awakened something in me that had been dormant for years, a sense of my own power, my own agency. I had spent so long being things for other people, a good wife, a devoted mother, a cooperative ex-wife, that I had forgotten I could be something for myself. That realization would prove to be more important than the revenge itself. Meanwhile, Brian's recovery was progressing exactly as I had predicted. The doctors had prescribed anti-inflammatory medication and recommended that he avoid spicy foods and harsh chemicals. More importantly, they had asked him detailed questions about the incident that clearly made him uncomfortable. According to Emma, who had visited him in the hospital at Tiffany's request, Brian was telling everyone that he had suffered an allergic reaction to a new laundry detergent. But his story kept changing. First it was detergent, then soap, then a new cologne. The inconsistencies were making people suspicious, and Tiffany was clearly frustrated with his inability to keep his story straight. The crack in their relationship was exactly what I had hoped for. Tiffany had married Brian because he represented security, success, and control. A man who could be laid low by his ex-wife's revenge plot was not the strong, dominant figure she had thought she was getting. 2 weeks after the hospital incident, Emma called with news that confirmed my suspicions. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. Tiffany and Dad had a huge fight last night. The neighbors heard them screaming at each other. Something about trust and lies and how she can't depend on him anymore." "What exactly did she say?" According to Mrs. Rodriguez next door, Tiffany was yelling about how she didn't sign up to be married to someone who couldn't even protect himself from his pathetic ex-wife. She said Dad was weak and that she was starting to wonder what else he had lied to her about. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Brian had chosen Tiffany because she was young and exciting, but youth and excitement rarely came with loyalty and resilience. When faced with the first real challenge to their perfect life, she was already looking for the exit. My revenge was succeeding beyond my wildest expectations. 3 weeks after what I privately called the chili incident, Brian's carefully constructed new life began to crumble in ways I could never have predicted. The revenge I had planned was supposed to be a one-time lesson in consequences, but it had triggered a chain reaction that was dismantling everything he valued. The first crack appeared in his professional life. Brian worked at Henderson & Associates, a prestigious accounting firm where reputation and client trust were everything. Someone, I never found out who, had mentioned Brian's mysterious allergic reaction to a colleague, who mentioned it to another colleague, who eventually shared it with a client during casual conversation. The client, Mrs. Dorothy Wu, was an elderly woman with a $2.3 million portfolio who had been with the firm for 15 years. She was also extremely conservative and had strong opinions about moral character. When she heard whispered rumors about Brian's intimate medical emergency, she began asking questions about the firm's employee standards. Emma heard about this development through her friend Jessica, whose mother worked as a secretary at Henderson & Associates. According to office gossip, Mrs. Wu had requested a meeting with the senior partners to express her concerns about Brian's lifestyle choices and whether they reflected the firm's values. "The partners are in damage control mode," Emma reported during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "They can't fire Dad because he hasn't actually done anything wrong, but they're clearly uncomfortable with the attention he's bringing to the firm." Meanwhile, Tiffany's doubts about her marriage were becoming more obvious to everyone around them. She had started making subtle but cutting comments about Brian's health issues on social media, posts that walked the line between concern and mockery. One particularly telling post read, "When you realize that some problems can't be solved with money or status, man matter lessons, niner growth, realizing man marriage is hard," accompanied by a photo of her looking pensively out a window. Their friends were beginning to notice the tension as well. Brian and Tiffany had been the couple everyone envied. Successful, attractive, seemingly perfect. But now, their social gatherings were filled with awkward silences and barely concealed hostility. Maria, who moved in some of the same social circles through her husband's business connections, reported back to me regularly. "Last night at the Hendersons' dinner party, Tiffany spent the entire evening flirting with other men while Brian sat in the corner looking miserable," she told me. Everyone was talking about it. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source, the video Tiffany had taken of Brian hitting me. I had assumed that video would remain private, perhaps shared with a few close friends for entertainment. But Tiffany, in her increasing frustration with Brian, had made a crucial mistake. During an argument about his weakness and inability to handle his ex-wife, she had threatened to show the video to other people to prove her point about his character. Brian, panicked at the thought of the assault becoming public, had tried to grab her phone. In the struggle that followed, Tiffany had accidentally posted the video to her Instagram story, where it remained visible for nearly 6 hours before she realized her mistake. By then, it was too late. Screenshots and screen recordings had been taken by multiple people, including some of my friends, who immediately alerted me to what had happened. The video was devastating for Brian. In 30 seconds of footage, it showed him violently slapping his ex-wife while his new wife laughed and filmed. There was no context that could make his actions look justified, no explanation that could excuse what people were seeing. Within 24 hours, Brian's professional reputation was in ruins. Mrs. Wu wasn't the only client expressing concerns anymore. Several others had seen the video or heard about it and were questioning whether they wanted their financial affairs handled by someone who assaulted women. The senior partners at Henderson & Associates called Brian into an emergency meeting. While they couldn't fire him immediately without risking a wrongful termination lawsuit, they made it clear that his future with the firm was in jeopardy. His client list was quietly redistributed to other accountants, and he was removed from all high-profile accounts. "They basically demoted him to entry-level work," Emma told me after hearing the details from Jessica's mother. "He's handling small business accounts and individual tax returns now. His salary was cut by $35,000 annually." The financial pressure was immediate and severe. Brian and Tiffany's lifestyle had been built on his $125,000 annual income, plus bonuses that often reached $20,000 or more. Their mortgage on the $450,000 house, Tiffany's car payments on her BMW, their country club membership fees, and her extensive shopping habits all required every dollar of Brian's income. With his reduced salary and the loss of his bonuses, they were facing a financial crisis that Tiffany was completely unprepared to handle. She had never worked a day in her life, depending first on her wealthy parents and then on Brian for financial security. The stress was showing. According to mutual friends, Brian had lost 15 pounds and developed a nervous tic. He was drinking heavily and had been seen at bars alone, looking disheveled and defeated. Tiffany, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly hostile and demanding, blaming him for their situation while offering no solutions. "She keeps saying she didn't sign up for this," Maria reported after another social gathering. She actually told someone at the grocery store that she was reconsidering her options regarding the marriage. The irony was beautiful in its completeness. Brian had destroyed our 20-year marriage for a woman who was now abandoning him the moment their perfect life faced its first real challenge. The loyalty and dedication he had thrown away for Tiffany's youth and beauty were nowhere to be found when he needed them most. But perhaps the most satisfying development was how our children were responding to the situation. Both Emma and Michael had been horrified by the video when they first saw it, but their reactions were not what Brian had expected. Instead of rallying to support their father, they were angrier than ever about his treatment of me. Seeing the assault captured on video, watching Tiffany's cruel laughter, had crystallized their understanding of what I had endured. "I can't believe I didn't do something that night," Michael said during one of our dinners together. "I should have protected you better." "You were in shock," I replied. "We all were. I don't blame you for not knowing how to react. But I do blame Dad," he said firmly, "and I'm starting to understand why you did what you did to him." Emma was even more direct in her support. "Mom, I'm proud of you for fighting back. Dad thought he could treat you like garbage because you'd always been so nice, so accommodating. He needed to learn that actions have consequences." The shift in my children's loyalties was something Brian hadn't anticipated. He had always assumed that his financial support and traditional role as head of the family would guarantee their respect and allegiance. But respect, I was learning, had to be earned and maintained. Violence and cruelty destroyed it faster than anything else. As Brian's world continued to unravel, I found myself in the unexpected position of watching from a place of strength rather than vulnerability. The revenge had been about making him suffer, but the aftermath was teaching me something more valuable. I was capable of far more than I had ever imagined. 2 months after the video went viral in our social circle, Brian appeared at my apartment door unannounced. It was a rainy Thursday evening in November, and I was enjoying a quiet dinner while reading a book, a simple pleasure that I had rediscovered in my new life of independence. When I opened the door, I barely recognized the man standing in the hallway. Brian had aged 10 years in 2 months. His hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress. He looked like a broken man. "Rebecca," he said, his voice hoarse and defeated, "we need to talk." I considered closing the door in his face. After everything he had put me through, I owed him nothing, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what the man who had once held all the power in our relationship had to say now that the tables had turned. "You have 5 minutes, I said, stepping back to let him in, but not offering him a seat. Brian walked into my small living room and looked around with an expression I couldn't quite read. The apartment was modest but comfortable, decorated with things I had chosen for myself rather than items selected to please someone else. It was the first space in 20 years that was truly mine. "It's nice," he said quietly. "Peaceful. What do you want, Brian?" He turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before. Genuine remorse. Not the calculated apologies he had given during our divorce proceedings. Not the hollow words designed to manipulate, but real, painful regret. "Tiffany left me," he said simply. "She filed for divorce last week." I wasn't surprised, but I was curious about the details. "What was the final straw?" "Money," he replied with a bitter laugh. "It was always about money with her. I just didn't want to see it. When my salary got cut and the bonuses stopped coming, she started looking for a way out. The video just gave her the excuse she needed. Brian sat down heavily on my couch without invitation, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. She took half of everything in the settlement, just like you did. But unlike you, she didn't earn it. She didn't sacrifice 20 years of her life, didn't raise children, didn't build something meaningful. She was just there for the good times. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Brian was now facing the same financial devastation he had inflicted on me, but without the moral high ground of being the wronged party. I lost the house, he continued. Couldn't afford the mortgage after the divorce and the salary cut. I'm living in a studio apartment now, driving a 10-year-old Honda. Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone. And you're telling me this because I need to apologize, he said, looking directly at me for the first time since entering my apartment. Not because I want anything from you, not because I think it will change anything, but because you deserve to hear it. Brian took a shaky breath before continuing. Rebecca, I was a terrible husband to you. I was selfish, cruel, and ungrateful. You gave me the best 20 years of your life, and I threw it away for someone who was never worth a fraction of what you are. The apology was more than I had ever expected to receive, but it felt hollow after everything that had happened. If you knew that, why did you treat me so badly during the divorce? Why did you humiliate me at Michael's birthday party? Because I was ashamed, he admitted. I knew I had made a mistake with Tiffany almost immediately after we got married. She was shallow, demanding, and completely self-centered, but I couldn't admit that to myself, let alone to anyone else. So I convinced myself that the problem was you, that you were boring, that you were holding me back, that I deserved better. He paused, running his hands through his thinning hair. The truth is, I was angry at myself for destroying the best thing in my life, and I took that anger out on you. Every time I saw you handling the divorce with dignity, every time you put our children's needs first, every time you showed the grace and strength that made me fall in love with you in the first place, it reminded me of what I had lost. Brian's words were having an unexpected effect on me. I had imagined this moment many times, the moment when he would finally acknowledge what he had done and express genuine remorse. But now that it was happening, I felt neither satisfaction nor vindication. I felt empty. You hit me, Brian, I said quietly, in front of our children, while your wife filmed it for entertainment. How do you explain that? His face crumpled with shame. I can't explain it. There's no excuse for what I did. I was drunk. I was angry. And I lashed out at the person I blamed for all my problems. But the truth is, you weren't the problem. I was. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 24 years of shared history settling between us. Finally, Brian spoke again. The thing that's eating me alive is knowing that our children saw me do that to you. Emma barely speaks to me anymore. And Michael looks at me like I'm a stranger. They're ashamed of me, and they should be. They're not ashamed because you made mistakes, Brian. They're ashamed because you never took responsibility for those mistakes until now, when you've lost everything and have nothing left to lose. You're right, he acknowledged. But I want you to know that what you did, the revenge, I deserved it. I deserved every minute of pain and humiliation. You showed me what it felt like to be powerless, to be at someone else's mercy. I needed to learn that lesson. Brian stood up slowly, looking older and more fragile than his 50 years. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Rebecca. I know I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to know that I understand now what I lost when I lost you. As he walked toward the door, I found myself speaking words I hadn't planned to say. Brian, I hope you find peace. I hope you learn from this and become a better person because of it. He turned back to me with tears in his eyes. Thank you for that. And Rebecca, I'm proud of you for fighting back. The woman I married was strong, but the woman you've become is stronger than I ever gave you credit for. After Brian left, I sat alone in my apartment thinking about forgiveness, revenge, and the strange ways that justice sometimes works itself out. The revenge had been satisfying, but this conversation, seeing Brian finally understand the depth of his failures, felt like the real victory. 6 months later, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the collar of my new navy blue blazer. At 47 years old, I was about to start my first day as a senior administrative coordinator at the Scripps Research Institute, a position that paid $52,000 annually and offered benefits I had only dreamed of during my marriage. The job had come through a connection I made in my evening business classes, where I had finally completed the degree I started 25 years earlier. Dr. Patricia Reeves, my organizational management professor, had recommended me when she learned about an opening at her husband's research facility. "Rebecca, you have organizational skills that most people spend years trying to develop," she had told me during our interview preparation session. "Don't let anyone convince you that your experience managing a household and raising children isn't valuable. Those are executive-level responsibilities." The transformation in my life over the past year had been extraordinary. The modest $85,000 I had received in the divorce settlement, combined with careful budgeting and strategic choices, had allowed me to create a stable foundation for my new life. I had moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, completed my education, and even managed to save $12,000 for emergencies. But the most important changes weren't financial, they were personal. The woman who had once defined herself entirely through her relationships with others had learned to find value and strength in her own accomplishments. My relationship with Emma and Michael had grown stronger than ever. Both of my children had seen their mother stand up for herself and fight back against injustice, and it had taught them valuable lessons about self-respect and personal boundaries. Emma, now 24 and working as a marketing coordinator, often sought my advice about workplace dynamics and relationships. "Mom, you're like a completely different person," she had told me recently. "You're still kind and caring, but you're also strong in a way you never were before. I want to be like that." Michael, who had initially struggled with my methods of revenge, had come to understand and respect my actions. "You taught me that good people don't have to be doormats," he said during a recent dinner together. "Sometimes fighting back is the right thing to do." The most unexpected development was in my social life. Through my classes, my new job, and various community activities, I had met people who saw me as I was now, rather than as Brian's ex-wife, or someone to be pitied. I had joined a hiking group, started volunteering at a women's shelter, and even begun dating someone, Dr. Marcus Thompson, a kind and accomplished psychiatrist who treated me with the respect and consideration I had forgotten I deserved. "You have an inner strength that's remarkable," Marcus had told me during one of our early conversations. "Whatever you've been through has made you incredibly resilient." I never told him about the revenge. That secret remained between Brian, myself, Emma, and Dr. Chen. But I didn't need to explain the details of my past for him to see the strength I had developed. As for Brian, his life had stabilized at a much lower level than he had once enjoyed. He was working at a small accounting firm, making $48,000 annually, less than half his previous salary. He lived alone in a modest apartment and had slowly begun rebuilding his relationship with our children. The humility forced on him by his circumstances had made him a better father, if not a better man. He no longer took Emma and Michael's affection for granted, and he worked hard to earn back their respect through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. Tiffany had quickly remarried, this time to a divorce attorney with a yacht and a house in La Jolla. According to social media posts that Emma occasionally showed me, she was once again living the lifestyle she craved, having learned nothing from her experience with Brian except to choose her next husband more carefully. The most important lesson I learned from my journey was that revenge, while satisfying, was not the source of my transformation. The real power came from recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminished it. Standing in my new office on that first day of work, surrounded by colleagues who valued my skills and contributions, I reflected on how far I had traveled from the broken woman who had been slapped to the ground in her own apartment just 1 year earlier. The revenge had been the catalyst, but the real victory was in rebuilding my life according to my own values and priorities. I had learned that I was capable of far more than I had ever imagined, not just in terms of plotting elaborate revenge, but in terms of creating a meaningful, independent life. As I settled into my new role, I thought about all the women who might be watching my story unfold, women who were trapped in relationships or situations where they felt powerless and invisible. I wanted them to know that it's never too late to fight back, to demand respect, to create a better life. Sometimes the best revenge isn't hurting the people who wronged you. It's becoming so successful, so happy, so fulfilled that their treatment of you becomes irrelevant to your future. But sometimes, when someone slaps you to the ground while their new wife films it for entertainment, a little chili pepper revenge is exactly what the situation calls for. If my story has inspired you, or if you faced similar challenges in your own life, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and transformation. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with people from around the world who understand that sometimes we have to fight for the respect we deserve. Remember, you are stronger than you know, more valuable than anyone who mistreats you realizes, and absolutely capable of creating the life you deserve. Sometimes it just takes a little spice to remind everyone, including yourself, of exactly who you are. Thank you for following my journey. Here's to all of us who refuse to stay down when life knocks us to the ground.